Now, cuddling is something we do when we really care about someone and want them to feel comfort. But this one teacher I had wanted to do way more than just make me feel comfortable. And this story does get insane, but before we get into that, make sure you guys press that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Seriously, it means a lot when you guys do and makes the channel grow bigger and bigger for more crazy stories like this one. But other than that, let's just jump straight into this really embarrassing story. Yo, what is going on, you guys? My name's Bubba, and welcome back to a really embarrassing story. So today's story all takes place back in my grade 10 year. Now in grade 10, I remember for one of the semesters, I had a course called science. And honestly, I was failing science class at this time because, well, I didn't understand all the minerals we had to study on the board. And it just was something that I was not good at because it took a lot of memorization. And I remember one time when I entered inside my classroom, instead of the usual old teacher that we usually had for chemistry, we ended up getting a new teacher that was really young and very attractive. Now me, I remember when she walked up to the front of the class introducing herself, I could not stop staring at her. I'm like, damn, like this teacher is really attractive. And when this teacher was taking attendance of basically saying everyone's name, she saw my name and said, Bubba, are you in the class? I ended up putting my hand saying, here, beautiful. And instantly the whole class started laughing and she started actually giggling herself, which was, well, a really big risk. But at the same time, back in high school in grade 10, I was a player. So in reality, I didn't really care. Going on from there, I remember basically this teacher was really attractive. And I remember since this teacher was so attractive, me paying attention to her was not that difficult to do because I would just keep staring at her like no tomorrow. Obviously, the teacher started noticing this and she ended up going back to her desk and noticing that on her screen of her computer, she saw that I was failing the class. When the teacher saw this, it looked like she had got a light bulb in her head and she ended up staring me down the whole time in class. I found this super weird. And then I remember right after class ended, she actually ended up walking up to me. She walked up to me and said, hey, Bubba, I saw you were failing this class. Do you need any help with anything? No, I'm trying to figure it out. Yeah, I mean, like, if you want to help, that'll be cool. Yeah, I'm your teacher, dummy. Of course I'm gonna help you. When she said this, I found this insane and I'm like, damn, like this teacher's actually really cool. And she ended up basically giving me her email to basically reach out to her if I needed help with chemistry homework. I remember when I ended up leaving the classroom after class, a lot of my friends ended up noticing that this teacher was really fond of me and was really excited to talk to me. But me, I kind of just ended up shrugging it away saying, guys, you guys don't know what you guys are talking about. Like, this teacher is just being a teacher. Obviously, my friends disagreed, but at the same time, what did I know? At the time, that's all I thought it was, until things got even more insane. Because I remember the next day when I entered class, right away, I ended up seeing this teacher in my chemistry class wearing the most revealing outfit I've ever seen. Like, I am not joking. Her cherries were really out there, and a lot of students started noticing. And me, I ended up trying to just focus on my, like, you know, homework, just trying to, like, you know, basically, you know, not make it seem as awkward as it was the first day. But as in the middle of class, while everyone's doing their homework, I remember this teacher ended up basically getting a piece of gum, chewing it, and walking up to me. She walked up to me saying, hey, Bubba, do you need like any help with the homework? Like, you didn't reach out to me yesterday over email. I ended up looking at her and I was like, no, I'm good. To be honest, I got this. I think I'm okay. Are you sure? You know what? After class, just come and talk to me. I'm always here to help. Okay, yeah, cool. I'll come to you after class. I remember she ended up saying, remember, just reach out to me, okay? Yeah, okay, tonight I'll make sure to reach out to you for the homework. Okay, perfect. And then afterwards, she ended up walking away from my desk. A lot of students in my class at that point knew something sus was going on, but me, I didn't know really what was going on. All I knew was that this teacher was drop dead gorgeous. I remember later that night when I went home, I didn't think anything. I just thought, you know what? I'm gonna do some homework and just get things done. And as I was in the middle of my chemistry homework, there was a part of the homework that I really did not understand. So me knowing I had my teacher's email, I ended up basically reaching out to her over my computer. She ended up basically reaching back out, and me and her, we ended up going through the homework together as she was saying some really flirtatious things to me over the email. Like, she ended up even saying, oh, you have such a cute idea over chemistry. I don't know. It made no sense what she was telling me, but at the same time, it got to the point where we were sending emails back and forth so much, it got to a point where she ended up telling me, Bubba, you know what? Here's my number. Just text me. You want me to text you help for my chemistry homework? Yeah, it'll make things easier. Duh. Okay, sure. Yeah, I can do that. And basically, me and her, we ended up taking it from email to our actual phones, which I don't know if it's illegal to text your teacher, but for me and this teacher, it didn't seem like it was illegal. But at the same time, am I really going to complain? She's also helping me with my chemistry homework. Like, I'm not really losing there. Going on from there, I remember basically the next day when I went back to school, right away, when I walked into my chemistry class, this teacher walks up to me right away and says, Bubba, did you end up finishing your homework I was helping you with last night? And right away, a bunch of students in my class ended up going, ooh. And I'm like, yeah, I ended up finishing it. And it was super awkward and embarrassing because I did not know what to say at the time. But going on with the story, I remember it got to a part where I remember in the middle of chemistry class, every time when this teacher was teaching on the board something like about minerals or something, she kept looking towards me and saying, Baba, did you understand that? Yeah, I understood it. And I would always say I understood it in the most weirdest way, to the point where I did not sound confident in myself. I remember towards the end of class though, she ended up telling me, after class today, can you stay in here and talk to me? I want to make sure you actually understood the homework. Like, in a way, it was very obvious to the entire class and me that she was giving me special treatment that I did not deserve. And it got super awkward. And I remember I was so embarrassed to the point where I was like, yeah, if I have to stay, sure. She ended up taking that as like a threat, but either way, I ended up staying after class. And after class, what ended up happening was the most insane thing ever, which I think was illegal. Because I remember when after class came around, everyone ended up leaving the classroom, and me and this teacher were just sitting there at our desks just doing our own thing. But then afterwards, she ended up walking up to me and she ended up basically leaning towards my desk with her cherries popping out, basically saying, okay, Baba, I really want to help you out with this, but you gotta let me help you, okay? Like, you can't be so sassy with me. Okay, well, to be honest with you, I don't understand this one. And then that's when she got the bright idea to end up basically walking around my desk towards my side of the desk and sitting on my lap. She literally sat on my lap and started cuddling me as we were doing chemistry homework that was right in front of us. She ended up grabbing my pencil with my hand and basically started, like, you know, writing down like chemistry stuff as she was cuddling me. At this point, this was the most weirdest time to ever cuddle a teacher, especially since it was at school. And me thinking things couldn't get worse, I remember one of the nerds in my class that was acing it ended up walking into the classroom saying, oh, like, I could help Bubba. And instantly he saw that me and the teacher were cuddling on that chair, and he instantly pulled out his phone and took a photo. But before me and the teacher noticed that he took a photo, my teacher instantly looks over at him saying, you can leave the classroom, okay? This is a private session. Okay, sorry. And he ended up basically walking out of the classroom. Honestly, this was one of the most craziest things ever, and the fact that this teacher ended up doing this was crazy to me. But the story gets even weirder, because I remember when I got home, everyone, and I mean every single person in my chemistry class, started texting me saying, yo, bro, are you actually like hooking up with the new teacher? Yo, Bubba, did you do the devil's tango with the teacher? And everyone kept asking me about this damn teacher, and I didn't know what to say. Honestly, at this point in time, I really just wanted all this to just go away, but I didn't know how. I remember that night when I went to bed, the next morning came around and I ended up going to school. And to be honest, this day I didn't really want to go to school because I didn't want everyone talking to me about the chemistry teacher. And when I went inside the classroom, I remember I looked around and I saw that my chemistry teacher wasn't there. I found it super weird, and when the bell rang for class to start, everyone's just sitting down wondering, where is our teacher? I remember 5 minutes later, the principal walks in. He walks in and says, Bubba, can I talk to you for a minute in my office? Yeah, sure. I ended up standing up and everyone did the same thing where they went, ooh. And me and this principal, we ended up going back to his office. He sat down with me and said, we need to talk about what I just saw here. What do you mean? And he ended up showing me a photo of me and the teacher cuddling that the nerd took. Now at this point, I remember I ended up basically like, you know, putting my head down in shame, not knowing what to say. And he ended up telling me, Bubba, you gotta be honest with me. Was this your doing or was this the teacher? I ended up saying how, like, to be honest, I have no idea what's going on. And to be honest, it all kind of just ended up happening. And I ended up getting a 1-day suspension as the teacher, well, she was fired from the school. After that day, I didn't really know what was going on, but when I went back to chemistry class, we ended up getting some new old guy as a teacher, which I mean, I guess made me start failing chemistry. But after everything, I will say this, right as school ended, I ended up getting a text message on my phone saying, Bubba, you got me fired. And that is where this story ends off. I remember when I handed my teacher the worksheet, out of nowhere, she ended up touching my hand by mistake, and we ended up locking eyes for like a good 30 seconds. And no joke, right at that moment, I knew I was falling in love with my teacher. Yo, what is going on, you guys? My name is Bubba, and welcome back to a super embarrassing, but I gotta say crazy story. So this story all takes place back when I was in my grade 9 year. Now in grade 9, I was a helpless romantic, but on top of that, I also really was like going through puberty, I guess. And I was realizing a lot of things about myself that I really did not want to learn, but at the same time, it comes with the territory of hitting puberty. Anyways, going on with the story, I remember there was one specific time where I was actually walking into my social studies classroom. Now when I walked inside, I saw there was no teacher there, which was really weird because the old man that would usually teach us would always appear there like 50 minutes early just to make sure he had all the things laid out for the work that we were going to do that day. But when I didn't see him, I went and sat down at my desk and I just started basically pulling out my textbook. Sure, I was a bit early for class, but I don't know. I really had nothing else going on that day, I guess. And then, well, one thing led to another. I remember the bell rang and everyone started heading towards their classrooms, and the classroom started to fill up over time. I remember when the classroom was fully filled up and the second bell rang for the class to start, everyone was looking around at each other thinking, yo, where's the teacher at? Isn't he like supposed to be here by now? And everyone started to worry. And usually there's a rule in every high school, which fun fact, if you guys did not know this is actually a true rule you guys can look up. But basically there's a rule that if the teacher doesn't show up for the first 30 minutes of class, you are free to leave. Actually, technically speaking, you're free to leave any classroom whenever you want, but my opinion, don't do that. Stay in school, kids. But I remember after a while, literally when 10 minutes went by, we ended up seeing a teacher run into the classroom. Now this teacher that walked in, she was the most stunning teacher I've ever laid eyes on. Like, I'm telling you, she had the blonde hair, she had big cherries, a nice peach, she was wearing a nice dress. Like, she looked so fantastic that, no joke, this teacher could be a supermodel. I remember when she walked in, everyone in the classroom started to stare at her. The girls started getting upset for some reason, and all the guys just could not lay their eyes off her. Which, I mean, to be fair, I don't blame them. Like, let's be real here. What kind of guy doesn't want an attractive teacher? Comment down below. But going on, I remember as she was like walking up to the front of the classroom, all of us could not stop staring at her. And it was super funny because I remember when she ended up writing her name on the board, she says, "So today I'm going to be your social studies teacher. Actually, I'm going to be your teacher for a while because my father is feeling sick. So I'm going to be basically running the class." At that moment, we were all in shock because we realized that this woman was our teacher's daughter. And she looked really good. Like, honestly, 100% the genes got to be coming from the mom, because our teacher, the old guy that I was talking about earlier, he was not that stunning, okay? Like, he was like mid, which sounds weird for me to say because he's a guy. But going on, I remember as this teacher was speaking, a lot of the guys started passing notes basically saying how, like, you know, this teacher was the most hottest teacher ever, how social studies is now their new favorite class to be in. And honestly, for me, I just could not stop staring at the teacher the entire time she was talking. It even got to the point where I was just watching her lips move, and it felt like nothing was registering that she was saying. I just kept looking at her, and I think I was like struck with a lightning bolt of love. It's like Cupid came into the classroom and just shot an arrow at me. Like, I just couldn't control myself. And I won't lie, there was a moment where she turned around and started writing more things on the board, and I got bricked by staring at her peach. But continuing on with the story, I remember it got to the point in the class where she started handing out worksheets, and she started handing out worksheets to all of us to do. It was like something about Napoleon, I think. And when she handed the worksheet to me, I remember I looked straight into her eyes and I said, "Thank you." And she says, yeah, no problem, Bubba." And she continues on handing the worksheet. At that moment, when she spoke to me, it felt like heaven started to come down. I guess you guys can kind of tell where I'm going with this, but there was the one moment where I knew I fell in love, and that was when I remember as everyone was sitting down doing the worksheet, I remember I did the worksheet as fast as I could because I thought if I was able to show her how smart I was, she would think of me more attractively, which sounds really bad because she's my teacher. But going on, I remember when I finished it, I was the first one to finish in the class, and I stood up and I walked over to my teacher, and everyone was staring at me. And right as I gave the teacher the worksheet, I remember she ended up grabbing it from my hand. She looked at me straight in the eyes, and she mistakenly touched my hand. And at that moment, me and the teacher, we locked eyes for 30 seconds with everybody in the classroom staring at us. And they knew that there was some form of connection. And me, when we were locking eyes together, me and that teacher, I'm telling you right now, at that moment, I knew I fell in love with my teacher. Now, you guys are probably thinking, okay, was that the story? You just touched her hand and that's it? No, because things get more insane. Because I remember after class that day, everyone ended up standing up and leaving the classroom. And then I was sitting in my desk, and right as I stood up to leave as well, the teacher says, "Bubba, can you stop right there for a minute? I need to talk to you before the class ends." Yeah, okay, I'll be here. I remember everyone started leaving the classroom staring at me, wondering why would I stay for? Because like I finished the worksheet and everything. I had no homework. But when everyone left, I ended up sitting back at my desk, and the teacher walked over to me and said, "So, Bubba, honestly, I just want to know, are we gonna have an issue here?" "Wait, what? Why would we have an issue?" "Well, I just want to know because my father told me that you weren't the brightest in the class and that you need special help. But today, you seem to know everything. So, is there something going on here? Is there some kind of trick you're playing?" No, there's no trick. I guess I just paid attention more today." And right as I was saying that too, the funny part was that I was staring straight at her cherries, and she clearly could tell. But instead of making things weird, she ends up telling me, "Okay, well, if you need anything, just let me know, okay?" And at that moment, she ended up putting her hand on my shoulder with her cherries right in front of my eyes. And no joke, like I was bricked out of my mind. But not only that, I was falling in love. Like this was like no feeling I ever had with any other girl before at this moment. And I didn't know what to think or say. I remember I ended up standing up right away out of nervousness, and I'm like, okay, cool. I'll let you know. Can I go now? Oh, yeah, no problem. You're free to leave. And when I left that classroom, I remember right as I walk out the door, a bunch of guys were running up to me saying, yo, Bubba, what happened in there? Did you do the teacher? Bubba, what's going on, bro? Like, what happened? And I didn't say a word. I just kept walking down the hallway in silence. And when I got home that day, I kept getting text messages from everyone trying to figure out what happened between me and this teacher. But let's just say things get a lot more insane the next day, because the next day when I go to school and I go inside that classroom, I remember it was super awkward because a lot of people like start staring at me because they still want to know what was going on. And the whole time when the teacher walked into the classroom and started teaching, every time she would talk about a certain topic or was teaching us about like, you know, the unit we were learning, she would only look at me. Like, you know how teachers, like, they're supposed to look at all the students to make sure they're paying attention? No, the only student she was staring at was me, directly into my eyes as she was talking. And everyone in the classroom noticed it. It got to the point where notes were being handed around saying, yo, I think Bubba and the teacher are gonna do it, bro. Like, this is the most insane staring contest I've ever seen. And they started making fun of me for basically staring back at the teacher, which is kind of unfair because everyone was staring at the teacher on the first day of her being there, but it's whatever. And I remember when class ended that day, once again, the teacher looks at me and says, Bubba, can you stay here for a minute? I need to talk to you. And I remember when everyone heard that, they all went, ooh. And it even got to the point where the teacher said, okay, not like that, guys. Don't be dumb. Time to leave. And when everyone left the classroom, I remember there were some people still staring through the window that was like on the side of the door in the class. And basically, when the teacher saw me sitting down at my desk, once again, waiting for her to speak, she walks up to me and she says, Bubba, I just want to know, is there any way you want to come over and get some help with the work? And on top of that, you could probably help me out with some things. At that moment, I stood there frozen. I didn't know if I should say yes, because what kind of guy goes to a teacher's house? But I remember I ended up shaking my head yes without even saying a word. And she just smiled, stood up, and just walked away back to her desk and wrote down her address on a sticky note and handed it to me. I remember everyone that was staring through the window were just trying to figure out what in the world was going on in that classroom and why I was getting handed a sticky note. But when I stood up and I walked out of the classroom, and at this moment, I still haven't said a word, by the way, right as I walk through the door, 3 guys walk up to me and say, yo, Bubba, what's on the sticky note, bro? Is it her number? Did you pull the teacher's number? And I looked at all of them and said, no, I just got my grade. That's all. Okay, man, whatever you say. I remember I followed my teacher into a room that was a fire escape, but when I walked through it, I realized it wasn't, and it was just a staircase leading down to the basement of the school. And I doubt anyone else knew about this other than this teacher. And when I went down those stairs, I'm telling you guys, it was the biggest mistake of my life. Yo, what is going on, you guys? My name's Bubba, and welcome back to another insane but crazy story. So this story all takes place back when I was in high school, and this was my grade 9 year. Now, in grade 9, I never really knew how weird high school was gonna be, because to be fair, everyone in my high school was immature, really dumb, and I guess still hitting puberty. I don't know what it is, but I feel like this generation hits puberty way later than they should. But as weird as that sounds, I remember one thing I also noticed that was a major difference from going from middle school to high school was that my teachers were a lot more secretive about their personal lives than before. Like, I remember back when I was in middle school, my middle school teacher wouldn't mind getting all personal with us, talking about her fiance, how crazy life's getting, and you know, all the exciting things that she was planning on doing even for the summer. But when I entered high school, I realized that all that changed. All the teachers were really closed off about their personal lives, nor did they want us to know anything about them. Like, even if we ended up finding them on Facebook, they would just automatically block us right away if we sent a friend request. Don't ask how I know, because, well, let's just say I have a little experience from that department, but that's a story for a different time. But I remember there was one moment in my grade 9 year that was the most insane thing ever. And in my grade 9 year, I decided to take a thing called criminology. If you guys don't know what criminology is, basically it's where you study how criminals do things and how, you know, detectives try to find criminals and serial killers. It's a whole, you know, class of basically learning how to solve crime. And I took this class not because I want to learn about criminals, but I want to learn how detectives and cops would, like, you know, solve certain crimes. So I remember I was basically entering that classroom one time, and when I sat down for my first day in that class, it was really awkward because right away we realized that the teacher was like almost like 20 minutes late. And when she walked in, the first thing she says is, all right, class, so I'm 20 minutes late. Anyone have any ideas of why? All the students put up their hand as if we're solving the case of where was our teacher for the last 20 minutes. But I think it was just a way for her to make an excuse of why she was away and make it into a lesson. But honestly, I didn't really care. We all started playing the game of where she was. But at the end of it, she ended up just saying no to all the guesses we had and just said, oh, well, it's time to make sure you guys learn how to become detectives. And that's when she gave us our first lesson. I don't really remember the lesson lessons, to be honest, but one thing I do remember about this teacher is about how often she would leave the classroom. I think like for the first like 2 weeks of me being in that class, one thing I noticed that any opportunity she had to leave the classroom, she would just go. And during lunchtime, after school, she was never available. She would always just disappear into the hallways, and that's it. She would just be gone. A lot of people thought like this was a part of like the whole classroom and kind of like her main character syndrome that she had since she was teaching us criminology, but I thought there was much more to her. So I remember one time when she ended up standing up and leaving the classroom, I stood up from my desk while everyone was still in class, by the way, and I went onto her computer. I went onto her computer and tried to see if there was anything on there that I could learn about the teacher and like what's going on with her and where she would go. But the only thing I found when I went on her computer were links to certain websites that I don't think legally you're allowed to go on. Like the things you were able to buy on this website were like handcuffs and rope and basically all the things you would need to like kidnap someone. I thought this was really weird, so I remember I ended up pulling out my phone, taking photos of it, until a student in the classroom ended up saying, "Oh, Bubba, are you trying to cheat? Are you trying to get the answer key, bro?" "Yeah, sure," is what I said, and I ended up going to sit back down at my desk to not raise any more suspicion. Because like I said, in high school, not everyone's that mature. Going on from there, I remember it was really awkward the next day of school, because the next day when I saw her go on her computer, she was probably doing the same thing. She was just scrolling through something that I couldn't see because I couldn't see her monitor, but then I decided to stand up and walk up to her. Now, standing up and walking up to her was like a last minute decision I made. I didn't really know what I was gonna say until I brought up the worksheet with me and just ended up asking her for help on the question. But right as I walked up towards her desk, I remember she ended up pressing Alt F4. And for those of you guys who aren't computer wizards, basically when you press Alt F4 on a computer, it closes what's ever open on the screen right at that moment. I remember I ended up looking at her and I basically ended up asking the question, and she ended up answering it like any other teacher. But then I ended up going back to sit down, and right away I ended up realizing that she was back on her computer doing the same thing. But then the most oddest thing ended up happening, where she stood up in front of the classroom and said, "Okay, class, I have to quickly go into a staff meeting. I'll talk to all you guys later." And she left. Now, instead of going on her computer, I decided to basically stand up and see if she was actually having a staff meeting. But right away, as I walked out of the classroom, I walked towards another class that was still in session, and I saw their teacher was still there. And when I went towards the offices where they would hold their staff meetings, I realized that everyone was still just as they were. At this moment, I realized my teacher did not go to a staff meeting. She was definitely going somewhere else. In that moment, I knew I need to figure out what. I remember that same day, it was around lunchtime, and I ended up basically jotting down a bunch of notes into my phone, basically planning on what I would do. And this whole plan, I'm not gonna lie, could get me in serious trouble, but I just wanted to see what was happening and what was going on with this teacher. In a way, it's kind of funny because we were learning criminology, so I guess this counts as me solving a crime. But going on with the story, I remember when it was close to being after school, there was still one more class I had to go to. But that class, I decided to skip. The reason I skipped it was because I wanted to figure out what in the world this teacher was doing. So I ended up basically setting up a stakeout right by my criminology class, and I waited for my teacher to come out. As I was just sitting there waiting, I remember I ended up, pulling out my phone, watching some YouTube videos, and then finally my teacher came out 20 minutes before class was supposed to end. I found it really suspicious, so I started following her around the school. One thing that was really weird is that as she was walking around though, I realized she would keep looking around her surroundings to make sure she wasn't being followed. And it was not making it any easier to follow her, but finally I ended up seeing her enter a fire escape that was in my school. Now when she walked in, I was majorly surprised because I thought the school alarm would end up going off since someone went through it. But apparently the fire alarm, I guess, was broken for this specific door. I have really no idea. So I ended up following in behind her, and I saw there was a giant staircase. My teacher was nowhere to be seen, but this staircase did not lead to an escape. It ended up leading actually to the basement of the school that no one was allowed into. I found this really weird, and I didn't know if anyone else knew about it. But at that moment, I didn't know what else to do, so I ended up pulling out my phone. I started recording and started going down the stairs. As I went to the bottom of the stairs, I saw there was another door, and it had the same label as, there was an alarm, don't open it, fire escape. But I decided to open it anyway because there was no other way my teacher could have went. And when I walked through that door, I realized my teacher was sitting there on this table, and around me I realized there were all stone concrete walls. And when I looked over on the ground, I realized there were chains that were literally just there. I ended up looking at my teacher, and my teacher instantly turns around and looks at me and says, "Baba, what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," is what I said to her. And that's when she starts freaking out. She runs over at me and she grabs me. She ends up grabbing me by the shirt, dragging me to where the chains were, and ended up locking my ankle to the chain that was concrete to the ground. I found this super weird, and I looked at her and I'm like, what are you doing? "Baba, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here? Why do you have a dungeon under here?" Bubba, it's none of your concern. You cannot say anything. What do you mean I can't say anything? I can't be locked down here. I have parents, you know? I remember she ends up looking at me and totally freaking out. She totally did not expect a student to be following her. And I ended up asking her one last time, what are you doing here? Like, honestly, just tell me what you're doing. Bubba, you see, a long time ago, my parents used to go to this school, and they always told me about how there was like an underground area where a lot of girls would get hurt. Now, I didn't believe them, but I became a teacher at the school, and I decided to follow this trail that they told me about, and now here I am. So now every day I come in here trying to figure out what happened down here. At that moment, I started to look around, and the more I looked around, I realized that she wasn't lying. She would bring all the materials and stuff she was teaching us in school for like getting fingerprints to finding blood, and she had her own amount of equipment there to basically figure out what happened and what really went down. At this moment, I looked at her and I'm like, so is this all like for a lesson? What? Oh no, definitely not. This is like a severe case. Then why don't you like just bring it to the police? Well, that's the thing. Since my parents told me about it, I don't know if they're involved. And that's when I told her that, you know, sometimes our past doesn't define who we are, and we just need to figure out what really happened down here. If it's that big of a deal, the police should know about it. I remember she ends up untying my chain afterwards, and she gets close to me and hugs me. Really have no idea what really happened there. I guess I had a heart-to-heart with her in a way. But then me and her went back up the stairs, and we ended up calling 911. Cops ended up coming to the school, which everyone was freaking out of why, until my criminology teacher ended up coming out and escorting the cops to, well, the basement, or I guess the dungeon area. And apparently, it was a crime scene. A lot of people were shocked, but it ended up hitting the news afterwards. And, well, I guess our school ended up becoming on the map for having a dungeon. To be honest, like I said earlier, high school, middle school are two very different things. But if you guys ever felt like your teacher had a secret, then fall for more embarrassing stories just like this one. Peace out, guys.